So just to introduce myself, my name is Mark DeMeo. I've led a wild and varied career. Started my career as an Oracle consultant. Did a number of Oracle implementations and VLDB, very large database implementations at GE Advanced Technology, Nielsen Advanced Technology. Started a couple consulting companies up in Chicago and Charlotte. Ran those for a number of years. Sold one of those companies to Palmer IT Solutions, which was $1 billion VAR in the US. So it was a Cisco partner, HP partner, IBM partner. Left there and took a 2-week consulting gig that turned into me becoming 9 years in South Miami and CIO of Tracfone Wireless. From there, went around, have been an independent consultant for a number of years, leading large engagements at Carnival Cruise Lines, WR Berkeley Insurance, and a couple of other places. And then wound up going back to work for a large mid-size outstaffing company, Svitla Systems, where I've been for the last 4 years, leading both the sales and the delivery organizations. So let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, Igor. So Svitla Systems, of course, to start off every presentation, you got to give the commercial. So what we are is we're 1,100 consultants working around the world in 13 different countries, supporting our clients that are in the US, Latin America, and Europe. We've done a number of projects, but we focus on digital disruptive technologies that companies are looking to build to remain competitive. Next slide. So some key facts about us. We've been in business over 21 years. We work out of 13 major locations, and we have another 6 satellite offices. Again, 1,100 engineers. There's not a lot of technology I don't touch. We have over 175 current clients, anywhere from VC-funded startups that are getting into the AI world, creating new and exciting products, to large companies such as Thermo Fisher, AstraZeneca, Disney, Marriott, to name a few. Next slide. So this is to talk about digital transformation. And this is based on a number of engagements we've done, either at Svitla I did earlier in my career, and sort of how we roadmap what companies have to go through. Sometimes we're doing this in conjunction with the head of digital transformation or with the CIO, or in some cases the CEO who's trying to figure out their next business strategy and what they're going to implement. But everything sort of has the same gist, from the steps that have to be followed in one manner or another to be able to make these type of strategic investment decisions. Next slide. So we're all familiar with technology. It's changed amazingly so in the last 15 years. As hardware's become much cheaper, new disruptive products have come out to the market. The cloud has expanded. SaaS offers have expanded. That the old days of, hey, I rack stack power servers, I start my app, everything's tied off my ERP system, that's my core centric, to how do I engage? How do I retain followers? How do I make connections with my customers? How do I cut my cost? Where do I make my investments? How am I going to grow from either organic growth or from merger acquisition? These are all the things that, companies that are small that want to become larger have to deal with. Next slide. So when you look at the infrastructure of most existing companies and where the investment dollars have gone, they've gone into the ERP core. The ERP system, payroll system, HCM system, EPM, supply chain management, and basically being able to get basic reporting. That is where the hardware costs are, the licensing costs are, and the majority of app support and support people, because those are the core internal systems that businesses use. What's happened is, with the advancement of technology, the advancement of the mobile phone, and people working remote, there are a number of other core engagements from either supplier engagement, customer engagement, that's around those core systems. But there's also a preponderance of third-party data processes that are also available to companies now to take advantage and leverage. The problem is 80% of most IT budgets are going to go to those legacy applications and supporting those legacy apps. The problem is, how do you take that remaining 20% and figure out what are the innovative products and solutions that your internal IT group can come up with to drive a strategy that's either going to increase revenue or decrease costs or provide some type of level of governance that the company needs to protect itself. And in sort of the example we have, it was for a banking client who was moving more into the fintech world, and they were looking to differentiate themselves and move from being the 5th largest bank in Spain to being in the top 3. And what they realized is why they had bank branches and all that, everything they had spent their money on was building out a branch network, and people weren't using branches anymore. The reason the other companies were bigger is because everything was off their mobile phone. There was an ease of use, there was an ease of adoption. So they were losing deposits. If you're a bank, losing deposits is not a good thing because it cuts down your ability to lend money. It cuts down on your credit rating. So they needed to rethink how they were going to engage their customer base and expand that overall deposit base by offering better services, newer services, things that others could do, and actually trying to leapfrog over top of those banks in front of them. So these were some of the ideas they had of how they had to come up with a strategy and what they could implement, but what they could implement from a cost justifiable perspective. Next slide. So this was one of the workout slides and when we were going through the strategic assessment. So they came up with a bunch of key aspects of things that were driving their industry. And that's one of the things in the strategic planning component of the digital transformation is, what are those strategic KPIs that you track in your industry? And how do you measure yourself against those? And then if you could improve those, what would be the impact to your bottom line, either from an ROI or ROE perspective? And that is what the strategic planning sessions are really geared to is, hey, we have this great idea, but if that idea isn't increasing revenue, isn't improving efficiency. Sorry about that, everybody.
Can you see it?
Yes. Go back 2 slides, I think. Okay, so that's what you're trying to accomplish. So next slide, and then the next slide after it. So I mentioned the roadmap. So these are the basic components of road mapping out from a digital transformation perspective. But this sort of works for almost any major business undertaking that a company is looking at. First question you have to answer is, from a company perspective, strategic vision perspective is, what are you trying to be? Because everything within your processes has to align to that vision and support that vision. So that is the overall driving mission statement of the company, strategic values of the company, how you're going to make money and what are you going to spend your money on, and who are you going to market and sell to? So those are the things you have to know before you start any of this. Once you sort of know where it is you want to be, then the question becomes, where are you from a maturity perspective? Oh, well, we're experts in SAP, but we've never done any of this other stuff. We've never used AI. We're not sure how blockchain works. We don't know this. We don't know what we can do, what we can't do. Our CEO went to a conference and somebody from Accenture was presenting and he heard all this and he wants to know why we don't do it. That's normally how we get involved in these conversations with the more IT-centric folks. They're getting direction from the top. They're looking at it. They know what they know. What they don't know is usually because they've never worked with it. So everything is sort of, well, where would we start? What are some great ideas? Okay. So this is what the maturity analysis component is. It's to keep you honest and understanding where you are today and where you want to go and what business function are you supporting as part of that. So as you go through and you've done your assessment over where we're at, the next question becomes okay, what are your options? What are the components you have? What are the processes? How do each of these processes stack up? Where do you think the low-hanging fruit is? Usually the goal is identify the least amount of effort, highest return of value. That gives you your phase one projects. Why? Because they should all be home runs for the company. That's how you're going to measure your initiatives. It's going to be measured on risk and value, right? So you have to be able to put a hard financial number against what you're going to achieve when you go after something. And again, what are your competitors doing? What are companies that are similar? They may not be in the same industry, but they have a similar background process. What are they doing to be successful? And are these things you can copy? Copying somebody else's success is a form of flattery, because if they're successful, then you can be successful. Once you sort of have your ideas and your wish list together, it's refining that wish list and figuring out how you're going to do it. What's your process going to be? What's your project initiation? What's the delivery dates you're setting? How are you staffing and ramping up this initiative? When is the cut? Are we going to follow a pure design method, a Kanban method, an agile method? What type of resourcing are we going to have? Where are we going to host at? What data are we going to share? What third-party extensions are we going to use? Those all become things of how you're going to implement. And again, understanding what best practices are out there. How are other companies tackling the same type of problems? There are companies that have gone out and hired a bunch of senior AI people to start implementing AI systems. One of the challenges with that is, hey, we got something set up. We don't have anything else. What are we paying these guys for? That becomes a big part of how you're going to have to think through your processes over the long term. You almost have to use a 3-year horizon, because as you're adopting change and implementing change, you have to think about what that looks like during that period of time. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So when you're doing the maturity analysis, we sort of split it into 4 levels, but everybody is at one of these levels. So for a beginner, you're pretty much still in the ERP world. If you go into a meeting, everybody's talking about the ERP systems. Hey, we're talking about Oracle. We're talking about SAP. We're talking about quote to cash. You're talking about basic core business processes. If you start to have an online presence, you're talking about your web front, how you're doing vanity websites to drive traffic, how you're doing some digital marketing. You're talking about Google Analytics. You're talking about those things that are either customer engaging. You're talking about APIs, integrations into your supplier network. You're looking at the world bigger than just your core system. If you already have reached the status of more a digital company, you don't have paper anymore. Everything is not email driven. It is all communication directly with suppliers and engagements through application systems. All your currency is pretty much digitalized at that point. If you are the digital economy leader, you are recognized in your industry at being the most productive company in your industry, because you have cut all the fat, all the paper, all the manual processes. You have electronic customer engagement. You have the ability to do forecasting analytics. You are the leader in adopted technologies. You are not the follower. Okay. So those are sort of the four. Usually companies I deal with are usually either at the beginning stage or the online presence stage. Why? Because they're usually the ones that need to catch up very quickly with the digital companies from a competition perspective. Their cost of servicing is too high. Their cost of support services are too high. Their cost of product is too high. Their revenues are not keeping up with revenue growth at their peers. So if they're publicly traded companies, they're getting hammered on that. Those are usually the companies that have more crises and need to evolve into the next level. You hear about disruptors in our marketplace. Hey, this little company started up. They have a great way of doing business. 9 times out of 10, the real story is they don't have all the legacy hangover cost associated with a mainstream business that's trying to be a disruptor. And because of that, the new company is able to invest the majority of their funds in driving new engagement models, new products, new innovative solutions, while the older company is still paying to support their legacy applications, support resources, business processes that they don't have the time to change out on. And that is sort of where you get to this disruptive influence that, hey, the new sexy hot company is where the investment dollars go. The old brick and mortar, you know what? They have revenue, but you know what? Somebody's going to steal their revenue because they can't compete in the new marketplace. Okay, next slide. So again, just to reiterate, when you're looking at the maturity analysis, these are some of the points that you would look for. The big one that with digital companies you start to see is you start to see the omni-channel experience. I'm doing it from mobile, I'm doing it from web, I'm doing it off IVR, I'm doing it off TikTok, Facebook. Pretty much anybody that I can show a product to can click and buy. And they have different purchase methods I can take. I can do credit card, I can do PayPal, I can do Split, I can do Square. You have a majority of methods to engage with that customer. Vice versa, you're usually going to have the ability to innovate very quickly. So usually these are some of the larger, more cloud platforms. Igor, we lost the presentation again.
Just a second.
Okay. So these are the things that are going to tend to drive and show you. And again, what you can do is you can use this as a checklist to sort of go through and just do a quick self-ranking of your own company in your own situation today, where you have experience and where your company doesn't have experience. Because again, what it'll do is it'll give you a quick idea of, hey, this is what we're good at. This is what our senior internal resources work on. This is where we don't have experience. Yes, that's going to knock you down on your maturity. But the more bluntly you are honest with your assessments, the easier it'll be to understand the risk of later on of deciding what implementation you want to tackle. Okay, next slide. So when you're looking at digital transformation, and there's sort of 2 basic things that come out of most of these assessments. So out of probably the 25 I've done in my career over the last 8 years, there's probably 2 major areas companies tend to focus on. And then if you think about it, it would sort of make sense. One is customer management. Why? Because this is your revenue. Okay, the quickest way to win approval from a CEO is your project is going to increase revenue, right? I mean, you've all been around in the IT world. If you have a PMBOK organization, what's the first thing they make you do? You got to put your hard dollar, soft dollar, ROI application together to get into the PMO office to go ahead and get scaled out for what they're going to approve against the limited capital dollars that companies have, right? The second one is operations optimization. This is where you're reducing costs. So usually when we go into these strategy sessions, the very first two things companies tend to focus on is, okay, what can we do to increase revenue? Where can we take out costs? Because anything that increases top line and reduces bottom line is a positive for companies. The three main enablers when we go into just figuring out how we're going to do things. The one big enabler is the cloud. 20 years ago, it wasn't the cloud. Probably 60% of my spend at Tracfone, because this is pretty much pre-cloud, 60% of our spend of capital dollars went to buy hardware for the projects. In today's world, I would actually just use the operational expense of going to a cloud system, setting up my prototypes, avoiding the rack stack power charges, and be able to start innovating as opposed to waiting for IT operations and the data center people to get their act together, buying 4 redundant systems so I can survive a hurricane, and do a failover and all those types of things. That's the advantage of the cloud, is it removes the biggest headache that we used to have with on-prem systems of rack stack power, buying server licenses, and all that acquisition cost that has to occur before we can start coding. Okay, with cloud, I can spin up my environment. I can go ahead and start development as soon as I get a go ahead. The second thing is, what are the models and the governance that you can use from an innovation perspective? And this is where all the new technologies start to play. AI is, from what we're seeing from our current customer base, the number one skill set or number one product companies that we're working with now, they're all working on AI products, either machine learning type products, deep data science type products, generative AI type products, building new models and understanding. But that is a big component of it. Blockchain is out there. IVR voice recognition is much more powerful than it used to be. There are companies that still don't have a mobile platform, or they haven't figured out how to actually use mobile to stay engaged with their customers. There's other social media if you're doing B2C, using the TikTok, using Facebook, leveraging through Amazon, all those other types of individual channels that can be created to try to drive customer engagement. And then again, the other big one is process automation. The RPA tool sets, the bots that are out there, the ability to reduce paper, retyping, because again, at the end of the day, you're still going to have your core systems for quote to cash, right? Or recruit to hire. But all that work, busy work that goes on with back office, removing that as a stumbling block, improving the efficiencies there, those are hard cost savings that can be utilized by the company to invest elsewhere. Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is that all of these new technologies, the ones that you mentioned, AI, blockchain, RPA, and others, are opening up opportunities that simply didn't exist in previous worlds. The startup world is trying to interrupt our businesses or more established businesses by leveraging that technology. And digital transformation really is our opportunity to leverage those opportunities to create new, to improve efficiency, certainly, but also to create new markets for ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So again, why cloud? These are some of the points that drive it. Guys, if I can take an application idea and I can launch it in 3 months, whereas traditionally the first 2 months would have been waiting on the hardware to get shipped and all that, that speed to market is a critical differentiator. It allows me to innovate without having sunk costs. That is probably one of the biggest things that you get. It's going to reduce your time. It reduces your upstart capitalization costs, which makes it, by the way, much easier to achieve your ROI because you can just add on the processing capacity or storage capacity as you need it, as opposed to trying to get the best deal and overbuying up front. So those are all things that help reduce those sunk costs that you have to recover with a higher ROI achieving. So things that people may have looked at before and go, well, it's a great idea, but we don't want to shell out $1.5 million, $1 million that's going to hardware, software licensing. Oh, you can do this for $500,000 and produce $2 million in revenue. That sounds like a winner. Why aren't we doing it? This is how you innovate and you find new markets and ways to engage. This is how you go ahead and test out something, an application. You sort of use the MVP methodology using Agile. You build for the common mass, go ahead, try to drive as much business, get your feedback, and then go to your improvement cycle. That's what we see from the product engineering companies that we work with that are much more successful than others, is that they have that sort of 3-month sprint to release type mentality where it's about getting common features, starting to gain market share, starting to build customer base, and build a revenue stream. The ones that are taking longer to build revenue streams, unfortunately, are also the ones that have a bad habit of their burn rate is too high and they run out of money before they actually have their big bang release. Or they get to the big bang release and they still don't have a revenue stream and they can't support the functionality for managing the application and adding additional features. Next slide. So again, we sort of took this from another client that we were working with. We looked at their different areas, and this is one of the things you would do during your strategy sessions is, what are the operational areas? And what does each of those operational areas look for from getting a benefit? Or what could we do from a digital transformation perspective to give them a benefit? And then based on that analysis, you go ahead and you come up with your value ranking of what those benefits can deliver. And that gives you sort of your short list of initial phase 1 projects or low-hanging fruit projects that you would go after. But this is one where we sort of looked at all their different operational expense areas, and we looked at what they could achieve from going to a much more either consistent platform, moving the cloud, using digital assets, looking at new technologies to improve their operational efficiencies. Okay, next slide. So again, when people tackle this, there's several different ways this is done. One is where it's an IT-led strategy. At Tracfone, ours was an IT-led strategy. Why? Because we had the majority of capital dollars. We sort of did the first pass at projects. We took input from the steering committee, but in overall decision-making and running governance, it was sort of run by IT of adopting which projects we were going to do based on business requests. Other companies, it's done more by a C-level digital transformation officer who's reporting directly to the CEO, and it's driving corporate down. And they sort of rope in everybody else who's going to support these applications in the future. So again, I've seen it work multiple ways. A lot of it comes down to the politics and the organizational structure, and how companies work. Smaller companies tend to be more at the top. Larger companies, it's in there, but there may be, if you take a Bank of America, there is a chief digital officer, but there's also 6 other guys that have the same title working for different divisions, all doing their own thing. And then there's probably another 20 guys who are leading their own efforts underneath some other engagement for a business unit. But the idea is that, strategy flows top down. Execution happens at the lower level with feedback to the top of what's working, what isn't. Because at the end of the day, you need the corporate execution because of the change management involved. Because anybody who's ever done implementations of ERP systems, HCM systems, you know that change management is the make or break for any project. And when you're changing things in a company, that change management requires a very high level steering committee support to get through the roadblocks that are set up. That hasn't changed in our industry in the last 50 years. People have agendas, people fight change. So those things still continue today, even in this new world. But, how you get around that, this is where your steering committee buy-in, your educational meetings, your prototyping, soliciting feedback, making people feel involved. That's what you're using these meetings for, is to get that type of buy-in from these groups. Okay, next slide. So there's two ways that companies approach. When we work with most startups that are building products, they are looking to be disruptive. Why? They have no legacy applications. They have nothing from day one start. They're building something net new, and they are on a 1 year net new horizon to go ahead and have their product released in the market. That is usually, when we work with startups, that's sort of the idea of what they're going after. They're there to disrupt. They're not there to build what already exists today. Okay? They think they have a way of doing it better, quicker, faster, cheaper than the existing technologies that exist today. Incremental innovation is the concept that, okay, I have a monolith of an organization. I have the Titanic. I see the iceberg in front of me. If we don't change our course and improve our processes, increase our revenue, we're going to hit the iceberg and sink the company. So I live in North Carolina. Okay. I moved down here in the 90s. I met more millionaires who ran textile companies and woodwork companies, furniture stores. Today, all those guys are out of business. So in 25 years, those two industries were crushed in the US. There's some little textile companies still around that do specialty niche products. You can still find Ashley Furniture. Well, their furniture is produced in China. Labor cost, material cost, all the things that they, innovation of making their plants more efficient, it wasn't what they invested in. And today, those two industries are completely decimated in the Southeast. That is a normal story in business, that if you're not innovating, you can get crushed very, very quickly. When I moved to Carolinas in 91, I had an NCNB account. When I worked with NCNB through a consulting company I worked with, Broadway and Seymour, they had one strategy. Their digital strategy at that point in time was, how can we make the cost of doing an acquisition cheaper? And what happened is NCNB got that cost to a point that they could pretty much buy up any major bank in the US. Oh, by the way, the one bank they bought was Bank of America and renamed the company. So that is what, knowing what your strategy is, whether it's going to be disruptive or incremental, and, what are the processes, the KPIs, how does your organizational structure work to support this? And, what are you looking to gain from it? Those are just a couple of examples of where, companies I've worked with in the past or people I've known in the past have either succeeded or failed, depending on how they approach these problems. At Tracfone, when I was there, we went from 8 million customers to 27 million customers. We went from $800 million to $8 billion in revenue. Why were we able to do that? We built a platform that we could roll out new products on. That was a critical component of it. We could underprice everybody else in the market. Think about it. If you get your AT&T bill, look at it. You can go to Tracfone and get a straight talk phone, get unlimited data, unlimited talk for $45 a month. Now what happens is Ryan Gosling comes out with Mint, and he's doing the same thing for $20 a month. So, why were we able to do that? Because we were able to do over-the-air activation. So we could cut down the cost of handling the phones from the beginning. We could go ahead and we could leverage Walmart as our distributor, so we didn't have to build branch stores. There's a number of things that come through when you're doing your strategy planning of how you're going to go to market, where your customers are, what you're trying to drive, and how you're going to do those engagements. And again, some things we did were very disruptive. Some things we did were just incremental innovation, like cutting down the cost of our servicing, because in all seriousness, our biggest expense was our call center. I used to support 15,000 call center agents. We had the largest Avaya switch in South Florida. Those become the things that drive. And again, you can maintain and do incremental improvements, or you can try to find out, hey, this is a way I can disrupt, and I can cut the cost of servicing a phone from $2 a month to $1 a month. I can increase the value of the company by 10, 20% if I can achieve that. And that's how you sell your ideas and your solution sets to upper management to get the okay to expend the funds. And that's what you sort of see with incremental. It's going to be more ROI oriented. Hey, we're going to make this change, we're going to see this. Whereas with disruptive, it's going to be more geared to, this is the revenue we're bringing in or the valuation we're bringing in. Because you're going to introduce something that new that should increase how the company is recognized, not just be a bottom line number. You still have to hit a bottom line number or top line number, but the idea is that you're changing the way the company is perceived. Okay.
Mark, I'd like to just add a couple of things here.
Sure.
Newer technologies, especially things like the cloud and low code, no code, allow us to very quickly, in using an agile approach, test out new ideas. Whereas, 5-10 years ago, you dealing with the waterfall approach, you'd have to put an awful lot of research into and then analysis to define exactly what you're doing, and then a huge investment in development and deployment, only to then find out something wasn't quite what you had imagined or you missed the mark on it. In today's world, with low code, no code, with the cloud, you can very quickly get an idea up, get it out there, tested for very small investment, and see whether it's worth pursuing or scrap it. We've seen clients doing dry wallet, where they create a mock-up of a product that doesn't exist, post it up on Amazon or their own website for sale, just to see whether people are going to purchase this or not. Then they go ahead and cancel the orders and say, yes, this is going to be a successful product. Let's move forward with that.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Next slide. So the way we see most of these groups get structured for digital transformation groups within companies, the first model, of course, is to decentralize. The operating departments, sales, marketing, chief service officer, they all have budget. They have ideas that they think are great for their department, and they go ahead and expend funds doing a solution themselves, usually with the help of shadow IT, right? They bring in a bunch of consultants who sold them an idea, and they go ahead and start an implementation for their part of the organization, ignoring how it might impact everybody else. This is very common in large organizations where, because of politics, budgets, and all that, lack of controls and governance, especially if you don't have a strong PMO organization watching capital dollars, this is what you tend to see. Now, again, some good solutions come out of it, but it's very haphazard depending on the leadership of the VP, SVP, in charge of the unit. In larger companies with multiple divisions, you could have each division running their own process of what they're doing, and you could basically have a bunch of them reinventing the wheel because they all want their personal stamp on it as opposed to a corporate stamp on it. Again, not unusual to see this. The coordinated model is really more the classic sort of PMO strategy where the head of digital transformation basically plays the supporting role as the project gatekeeper, almost in a PMO role of the owner of all the initiatives that are being done across different divisions. And he becomes responsible for trying to figure out, what's reusable between different departments or different sub companies and all that. But, they act more as a small staffed group, not as necessarily the executor, but as more the manager, budget authority, line reporting authority, running more of the committee meetings, the results measurement, as opposed to architecting the solutions. In the cross-sectional model, what happens is the digital transformation team almost acts as a peer IT team with resources and implementation expertise, and they take on a set of projects that they're managing for the businesses, and they're not only doing the management of those projects, they're doing the execution of those projects, and they're tasked with enforcing the reusability of the solutions across the units. So those are sort of the three core models. We've run across companies that are working in all three slightly differently. But, that's sort of what we're seeing out there right now. And again, it usually sort of follows what we've noticed. It tends to follow the way the CIO and PMO is structured, tends to dictate how these groups are set up. Next slide. So real quick, when we were doing the roadmap for one customer, this is actually sort of part of their data. So when we went through the propositions of where the values were, revenue and cost of risk were the two big splits for them. They went through and they said, okay, these are the value potentials we need to realize. And then they sort of ranked those, what they thought percentage gain and top revenue they would be able to achieve if they made an investment. And then they listed what initiatives would actually support that valuation. So new customers was the goal creation. The initiatives that could support that in this example were social media, customers advocacy, being able to tell the story, try to drive engagement, bring that new customers in, improving the customer experience. Their app was sort of hard to negotiate. One of the things they realized is they had people just drop off the website at a higher rate, and and what they found is the navigation, certain things couldn't be bought off the website. People got frustrated, leave, and never came back. And then again, better services, those types of things that could also increase their customer engagement. So they came up with these lists. They put a value of where it would hit top line, bottom line numbers. And from there, they sort of derived their phase one initiatives based on what they thought the cost would be against what the benefits would be. Mike, do you want to add anything?
One of our clients, just to kind of give an example, one of our clients is a manufacturer, international manufacturer with manufacturing facilities all around the globe. And they, one of their big cost drivers and concerns for the organization were accidents that happened. They would not only cause injury, sometimes death, to the individual, but it also had a huge impact on the business. When morale's down around those things, you'd see a reduction in productivity, et cetera. So they had years worth of fairly unstructured information, data about all of these accidents that had occurred over time. We developed a system with them based on using generative AI capabilities to evaluate all of those, all that data around the accidents and identify hidden trends and opportunities for them to invest in improvements in the factories. I mean, this is just one of the many uses of these modern technologies that we are involved with.
Okay, great. Next slide. So what happens is we take each initiative and we break it down into the use case feature set that goes around that. Because again, you're going to need this to sort of evaluate the cost of implementation of each of the components. So this sort of becomes the wish list requirements for what this initiative would have associated with it. So for them, again, using sort of the same example of improving the customer experience, these were all things that they could not do easily, that you had to do at a branch versus being able to do from a disconnected source, such as your mobile phone or from the web. So normally what would happen is part of your discussions, hey, these are initiatives. Well, what does that really entail? And this is where you drive out from the business people what they're really thinking, and starting to put on your IT hats. Oh, well, we could implement this service. We could use Google Maps to do a branch location component. This is where you start figuring out what you can take advantage of and what the cost of implementation is going to be. Okay, next. So again, from an end-to-end process, this is sort of what it looks like. The first thing you have to understand is your business environment and your requirements. That's what you're trying to do. Figure out, what is everybody talking about? What does everybody see a value? What are your competitors doing? What is the market telling you? Who are the disruptors that are coming in? Understand your current state and where you want to be. Because what your road mapping is from current state to future state. Once you sort of have that down, what's your operational model? Where are you from maturity? Where are you trying to get to? What's changing in the industry? What's changing in the future state of technology? What can you leverage? What components of AI are out there? What can cloud give you? What can all these API services that are available give you to expand your operational capability? All those components go into starting to figure out what it is you can do and you can do quickly. And then figuring out what capabilities you have internally and which ones you need to hire externally. Okay? Because again, at the end of the day, most companies going through this will have some components, will have some experience, but they may not have experience with all the technologies that they need. Once you sort of have all that together and you have your sort of short list, what are those high value, low risk? Do you want to go big bang and be disruptive? Do you want to go, hey, we're going to do these 3 or 4 things, get comfortable with it, implement this change, get organizational buy-in, and then we'll do a phase 2 set of initiatives? Because maybe we think things will change in a year and some other things that weren't as important may become more important. Once you sort of have your roadmap and your initial set of projects, then like anything else, it's setting up your project management, building your agile squads, determining what your implementation schedule is going to be, and figuring out, okay, here's the partners we're selecting, here's the internal staff we're using, here's their direction, here's our steering committee, here's your budget, go make us successful, and then oversight of those operations. Okay, but in a nutshell, that's sort of how it all goes, how it all gets put together. And again, if most of you are familiar with doing large ERP implementations and all that, it's very similar to those roadmaps also. It's getting business buy-in, acquiring dollars, knowing where value is, coming up with a work plan that's going to be successful, make everybody look like heroes, and then successfully delivering. Okay, next slide. So for two different customers, this is sort of the approaches they wound up taking through this. With customer one, we went through the roadmap. They came up with, they had to look at their distribution model because that was a big point of contention for them from an expense. Customer experience was another component. How they reducing their cost at the per bank. They wanted to make sure everything was aligned in the same digital way because they had a lot of fracturization between channels, and then create value. That was their approach. Another group, they went much more with, hey, we have to standardize and rationalize what we're doing, how we're doing it, because they wanted to implement multi-channel. So they needed to have common core back-end transactional processes that could take any interface point into the company and drive transactional data through. So that was sort of their approach. So the one was a little bit more disruptive. The other one was a little bit more innovative in that it was a more incremental improvements across. But again, every company, when you go through this process, you all sort of come out with your own roadmaps because, again, different things are going to be more important to your steering committee than another company may see it. All right, next slide. Try to finish up and stay on time. Okay, so next steps. Hopefully you guys found this interesting. What we offer, just to give my sales pitch here, we do this in 3-4 week assessments. Usually for $500 million, $1 billion under company, with a steering committee. If you need help getting started, we love it. We love the opportunity to help you. But usually this is where we would start from. It's usually about the key stakeholders because the senior people have to make the investment and sign off on it. Plus, you want to get their buy-in early in the process. You want them to feel like they're contributing. You got to know the metrics that you're influencing and how those metrics are generated. Because again, like anybody who's been around has done business analytics for a company, knowing how KPIs are calculated, how they're measured, those are the things you're influencing. So what you have to show is how you changed and influenced those KPIs. Architecting quickly, being able to come up with a quick roadmap of successes, that is the critical component that we usually try to help companies identify. Hey, this is what we heard from your company. Like the one company we're working with now, they had a suite of things they wanted to do. They only had budget for a certain couple of components after we talked in more detail with them. And what they decided is we need to know how our external competitors are doing against us. So they know their numbers. They don't know how they're doing against everybody else. And since they sell in the distilled marketplace, they need to know how many visitors are going to everybody else's locations. How much are they shipping? What flavors do they have? How's the market moving? What are the customer preferences? So we know what to manufacture. All those things are very, very important to them. And when they looked at it, we went through the number of things they were looking at. That was the critical component that they identified as, hey, this would be the first huge success for our company because we don't have anything that does this today. Okay, I think we may have time for a couple quick questions. Igor?
Yep, we have 2 messages right now. I will redirect it to your chat.
Okay.
Here it is. Can you see it?
Yes.
Great.
Like you're putting about power and cloud, moving from capital operating expenses, product funded versus are key. How do you make these shifts? Okay, so I went through a lot of this at Tracfone. So my budget was $150 million. Just so you know, $85 million 85 million of that was for telecom expense. What happens is how you structure your internally within an IT organization, how you structure your steering committee and your PMO office and your budgeting process are the most critical components. Okay? Because planning is the key. Getting end user buy-in, since you're spending the capital dollars and owning the capital budget, is the critical thing for the PMO office. And then supporting that internal communication process for the prioritization of projects. If you do not have that, then IT becomes a whipping boy for the business units. Okay? And that's sort of how you control the shadow IT organizations, and those types of components that tend to cause more stress in an IT organization. But your PMO budgeting process is really the key component to being able to know, hey, this is where I can free up dollars. This is what I'm moving. Because remember, the downside is, yes, you move the cloud, so it turns into an operational expense, not a capital expense. There's still some components you can capitalize, but because you're not going to have a depreciation expense on your budget line item anymore, you're going to have a higher operational expense. You have to be able to identify that in your budget tracking documents, right? So those become some of the key components that you have to work out as part of your operational strategy with your PMO group and your finance group. Okay? Yeah, somebody made a comment. Your points about politics and budget owners is so right. Listen, I've been doing this for a number of years. Doesn't matter what I started in, my first job was writing COBOL on a mainframe. It was still the same problem back then. Different people were arguing why they should have more TSO minutes allocated to them over these guys. When there's money involved and there's pride and egos involved, it's always going to devolve into who shouts the loudest, who gets the CEO support, who thinks he's the big dog, and that's what we deal with as IT workers, right? So again, the way you protect yourself, planning is the key. So using a steering committee to get buy-in and enforce agreement, reporting, so people don't accuse you of misleading or lying and all the other things that people accuse us of. Those are all key components to being successful. Let me see. Have you ever dealt with a client that want to innovate using technologies you're not so familiar with? Yeah, actually, when I went to AC Nielsen Advanced Technology Group, we were actually we actually used a number of technologies that I personally had no clue how they worked. But again, that's why we have user manuals. We built the first Sybase terabyte database. Our spinning disk cost us $6 million on that project just for the proof of concept system, by the way. So those are the types of things that, yes, when you're dealing with technologies that aren't new. Now, what we did is we acquired some of the senior talent and we cross-trained our existing people at Nielsen into those technologies as part of that conversion from mainframe DB2 into more building a much more cost-effective environment on HP using Sybase. But those are the ways that you because remember, part of what you have to build when you're building these proof of concepts or these demo projects or initial deployments is you have to build the support staff organization for those at the same time. Okay.
I'd like to add something there as well. Yes. To that last question. At the end, he said, how often is digital transformation work you do about making better use of existing technology in situ? I was with Microsoft for 5 years, and that was the thrust of my job at that point. Many companies have invested in technologies that they're not leveraging, and they have a need, and those technologies can provide benefit. So a lot of the digital transformation work that we're doing does involve new technologies, but a lot involves existing technologies that they have and leveraging that better. And some, quite frankly, are some business process changes or just identifying new products to offer or new marketing strategies. And it doesn't involve new technologies at all.
Okay, well, we'd like to thank everybody for their time. Hopefully you found it enjoyable. We try not to read the slides to you. No, we try to make it interesting by telling anecdotes of what we've experienced in our careers. But hopefully you all got something out of it.